Welcome, friendly faces and new faces. We're here today. We get to do something, get to do some sitting, but we get to do something very fun in my mind, which is last month, John Tarrant's book, The Story of the Buddha, came out through Shambhala. And if you don't have yours yet, we'll make sure you can get one by the end. And so in conjunction with Point Reyes Books, which if you haven't been and you're within at least a day's drive, it's nice to support independent bookstores. And they've generously sort of co-hosted this with us. And no, there's a lot to say. This is both a physically beautiful book. Shambhala really invested to make the gold and the images selected and the typeface and the binding. It's just a nice companion to keep with you, which is helpful because this is a story that one can read over and over and listen to over and over again because it just kind of keeps working on you. So our plan for the day is John and I and maybe some others are going to have a chat about just some of the elements and teachings of this book. And then because it's so nice to listen to, John's going to read us a good section of it a little later. So, hi, John. You want to say?
Hi, Tess. Yeah, this has been fun. The project, should I say something just about the project?
Say something, please.
I can wait for you to tell me to say things. Okay. I've been interested in mythology since I was a kid and stories. I love stories. And so at some stage it occurred to me that the Buddha story was like believed by a lot of people who were meditating with me. Meditation I found to be very helpful. The Buddha story, perhaps not so much. And and I realized that people were believing all this stuff at a very literal level. And I thought, well, what if I look at this as a myth, like other myths that I like, Vasilisa, the great Russian fairy tale, things like that. And or really, I came out of poetry, so out of the poetry world, really as like a long prose poem or something like that. And the whole thing became, I wanted to free us from having to believe in a story in a literal way. And, I had a young kid and I really didn't like the idea of having to leave your family the day your kid was born, which seemed to me like, oh no, we've got to make this into a metaphor somehow, and things like that. But it's also one of the great, if you want, Roberto Colossus has this great thing. If you want myths and legends about consciousness, you have to go to India and China and Japan. You have to go, particularly India. Yeah, so you have to, the myths are actually about consciousness, whereas you can tell transformations of consciousness are inside the Greek myths and so on, but it's not explicitly there. And so I thought it'd be great to do this as a myth. And since I like storytelling, I'd tell that. And the thing that struck me that I say in the book was that, Odysseus, a complicated man, as Emily Wilson calls him, he spent, he got kidnapped, like drafted into the Trojan War, which he wanted to escape. And then Achilles did too. And so then after, years of killing and looting and escaping with his life, he finally comes home to his wife and his kid and his old dog who dies when he sees him, dies out of joy, and his old father. And but all that is what, and he's so happy to get that. But all that is what the Buddha leaves, because the Buddha wants something else. He wants something that's deep in some transformation of consciousness. And so the whole story is about that. And so I thought that was kind of, it's going to be something to do with why we meditate. And so I thought I'd examine that. but I did know people. I mean, I don't think it happens so much now, but when I was first in meditation in my generation, um, we were asking questions like, "Can Westerners get enlightened?" and things like that. It was very exciting for us. And I'm like, oh, eye roll, you know. It's like enlightenment is possible. Obviously, even dogs can do it, you know. So, but you know, it was interesting. We were asking very basic, fundamental questions, and so seemed to me, and there were people who were saying, "Well, Buddha didn't, you know, I have to, you know, let his father raise my kid because I've got to go off into the monastery and things like that." And I know people like that who became teachers and all, and they're not bad people or bad teachers, but I thought there was a delusion going on there, you know, and so I don't know, a delusion, and it was a different attitude from the one I was thinking of. So I thought I'd explore it with the story, and where the Buddha, you know, I don't know, transforms in some way, and the people around him transform. So shall I start? I don't know. Should I start reading a bit, or what?
Can I
What?
ask you a couple more questions first, just about some of the things you said that were interesting, and I've been thinking about too.
Very good.
One is, as you say, I think it's a feature of the Dharma in particular, and a feature of myths that they wear out if they don't get redreamed. Like, and they've been, you know, knit together and sort of rewoven and over a long time. And I think one of the features of your work in particular, not just in this story, but you've done it with dedications, you've done it with ceremonies, you've done different things that you have redreamed them in a certain way or given them language that we can somehow, I don't know in our own culture, or know in our own hearts, or things like that. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about, as you started working on this story, just what that was like to let it, because I think one of the things that's interesting is a lot of details appear that, you know, are new details as part of this dreaming of it. And details are such an important part of what the psyche seizes on. Like, they're part of what something, you know, someone who was reading this said to me that, you know, one of the pictures toward the back of just the clothes hanging on the line just grabbed her, and she thought, that is an amazing image, and it just, you know, brought her into the story. And so what was it like to tinker with it and let those details appear as you've been working on it?
Well, two things. I want to. The images seem important to me, and that was Nico Odysseus, who's the relatively new CEO of Shambhala. He was keen on the book, and he liked the idea of us finding images, although there was no budget for them and things like that. And I said, well, we'll find cheap images and we'll pay. So it was kind of great. And Alison Atwell, who's on here somewhere, was who's an artist, and then she really, you know, searched through the British obvious places like the British Museum and the Met and things like that. And some of them, the Met was very good about images. The British Museum charged you £100, sort of like that. And but you know, that's not much for a book, you know. So and so she found this great, and then we got together and put the images in these rather amusing places, like to us amusing places, and some of the images were very amusing. So I could talk about that. I'll just speak a little about the images. For example, there's a whole elephant theme runs through Buddha's life. His mother dreams of a white elephant entering her womb, and then she wakes up pregnant, you know, with the Buddha. But then the Japanese, who have a quirky idea of this, then the elephant is the mount of Samantabhadra, the bodhisattva of great action. So they showed the Buddha's mother riding on an elephant, and then later on they showed geishas riding on an elephant. And so then they showed, and there's one in the book of a monk sort of worshipping a geisha as the embodiment on an elephant, as the embodiment of Samantabhadra, and she's sort of waving her fan. And so there was a certain way in which as the story was already evolving in other cultures, and I thought it was rather wonderful. And then we did things like just showing the washing draped over the line, things like that. Or the very last image of the book is, and everybody has Buddha nature. It shows people hurrying on old Hokusai illustration, people hurrying across a bridge in Kyoto in the rain. So it was kind of fun to get. So there's a lot of fun in the images. But I'll tell you how the story began, which is I just had this idea, but I didn't know anything about the Buddha. So the way I was raised Catholic, and you never knew anything about the Bible or anything like that. I just sort of thought that was good enough for Buddhism for me to. But it was more of a transformation of consciousness project. But then, as I said, I noticed that other people were taking it really seriously, and I thought, oh well. So I started telling, and I've been working on story projects with other people, Michael Mead, for example, the Irish American storyteller, and with Ghetto Kids and things like that. So I thought, well, I'll just tell it. So I decided, how will I find out how to do this? I'll just do it. So it was an improvisational thing, and I'd have a one-day retreat, and I'd stumble through as much as I knew of the story, and then that way I'd realize what things touch people and what things I didn't know anything about. And so gradually the details appeared over 15 years or something of doing that. And that was kind of great. And we have this idea that, transformation is a matter of like koan work and things like that. You need a culture for awakening, and so that was my way of stumbling into a culture and finding out what it is. I really like the idea of finding out what you're doing by setting off. Louise Gluck has a interview, I think in the latest New Yorker, probably fairly old, and there's a great thing where she talks about that's what she liked about poetry. She didn't know where it was taking her, and you couldn't get out alive, kind of thing. So I felt like the stories are like that, and you can't really get out of them without finding out where they're taking you. So a whole group of people sitting over the years did put up with me stumbling through the story, and until it came down. It was like an alchemical process. It became very refined. I think. Well, I don't know. Make up your own mind if you read it. But I stripped it down. At one stage, it was like a 80-page novella at some stage, and I stripped that out, things like that. So I got a basic bare story I felt that would transform consciousness, I hope, too.
One of the things you say about it that I loved a lot in the introduction was you say it's an act of humility and intimacy to let something act on us without knowing what we'll get in return. And one of I like what you just said, that in order to know anything about it, just like a koan, you had to enter it to see what it actually had to say and what it was doing to you as that was happening. And one of the most interesting discoveries I thought you had about that was that Mara is lonely. I don't think I've come across that anywhere else, and I was curious, like how did you know that, or when or how did that come to you?
Well, we know that we have a secret feeling for our demons. Most people realize that, and and that the demons probably have a secret feeling for us, even though that I'm going to get you into hell and all that sort of thing. So I kind of like that quality, and about I don't know, there was something important there for me, and I think I really like I don't know, somebody else. It stands to me like Buddha's life was so lonely, and then it came to me that Mara's life was so lonely, And Buddha's life thought his life was virtuous, but Mara was not of that opinion, either about Buddha or himself. And so I feel in some way that, the Jungian idea of there were shadows of each other, and it was a very nice thing. And I don't think he quite is explicit about this, but Colosso may also have wondered what Mara thought about Buddha and things like that. And it's always interesting to take it the other way. Well, what do I feed the birds? What do the birds think about us? Things like that. So I always liked that quality, and so I just felt some sort of the story warmed up when I realized that Mara was lonely and wanting a friend in a way. And like a
Yeah.
lot of people, he has an attachment disorder and can't quite deal with his friend without fighting with him and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And, well, the last thing I'll say, and then I think it'd be great to have you read some, it's just that I love that line about that it's still not clear which forces were helping him and which forces were hindering him, and how the sometimes the what seems to love us or keep us safe or want us to stay the same or protect us or something can actually be hindering the journey, and what seems to be, as you say, tormenting us or giving us a pass to hell or something like that may actually be a vital element. And in that same way, we don't know until you actually enter. But I like that weaving throughout the story. So you have anything more you want to say about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's like everybody, you notice this with a teenager, say, they're having a, I got thrown over by my girlfriend slash boyfriend, whatever, and how terrible it is. And you realize, oh, this is actually pretty good for them. And, but it's also true of us, the most disastrous things that happen, whatever they are, you know, or that we think are disastrous, and in some way deepen us and transform us. And I felt like, well, the Buddha, if anybody needed to be deepened, it was this prince who was so perfect about everything, and uh, and so you could tell that the whole thing was. I mean, I felt that with me too. Like one of the things to the extent that I learned it, one of the things I learned in meditation was, it's good to fail. Um, somebody said, I have a friend who wrote a book saying the Tao of business or the Tao of success or something like that. And my agent, who actually was his agent at the time, I was not anymore, said it should be that say success is as important, failure is as important as success. He wanted to call the book that, the business book. So, which would have been a good idea. So there's that quality runs through. It's a Taoist thing, I think, really, and a koan thing. And so that if you enter the part where it seems most repulsive and you don't just want to spit it out and it's got tentacles or whatever it has, it smells bad. If you enter that part, that's where the transformation will come. That's where the gates are. So, I don't know.
Beautiful.
I answer your question. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. Will you read us some now? Will you let us enter?
Uh, well, the other thing about the simplicity of it, at some stage, occasion, what are we going to call this? And I think this was Nico too. Said, "Oh, let's just call it Story of the Buddha." Good enough. And so that was the simplicity of the whole thing was there too. So, the Story of the Buddha. It's early in December. Winter is coming on. Snow is falling lightly in the mountains, and the mind begins to empty. Sit close to the fire and listen while I tell the story. Long ago and far away at Lumbini, in the green foothills of the Himalayas, there lived a queen. Her name was Mahamaya, which means great dream. Her eyes were the color of lotus leaves, her glance was a blessing, and her smile was a gift. After 20 years, she and the king had no child. Then, one midsummer day, she herself handed out gifts to the poor and the hermits. That night, under the full moon, everything changed. The queen dreamed that the guardians of the four directions, the great spirits who protect the wisdom teachings, came to her. They had strong, dark faces. They bent over her and carried her high into the mountains. Their wives bathed her in a lake and bore her into a golden palace on Silver Hill, where they laid her down upon a couch. From the steppes and the northern snows, a white elephant with 6 tusks approached. She could see the wrinkles in his skin, Holding a white lotus in his trunk, he entered her body and disappeared into her womb. Trees blossomed, musical instruments played by themselves, and people spoke kindly to one another. The old gods, Brahma and Indra, were the witnesses. When the queen awoke, she knew straight away that she had conceived. In the palace, the dream readers came in red and saffron costumes and considered Mahamaya's dream. The dream readers were analyzing the dream of the queen, but also the dream of the universe, which had made this dream. He has lived many lives before this one, they said. He will be a great leader. The king listened, but said nothing. In May, when everything is in flower, the birds are singing. Maya's time was near, and she traveled back to her original family, revisiting her childhood places. Her sister, Mahaprajapati, went with her, and when they reached the Lumbini forest, they stopped to rest. The women went into the groves to walk once more among the flowering sal trees where they had played as children. Maya climbed into the roots of a great tree. She reached up for a flowering branch. She reached up for a flowering branch, and the branch bowed down to her hand. As she held the bough, her labor began, and her child was born. Her skin was golden, and the moment after birth, he took 7 steps. With one hand, he pointed to the sky, and with the other to the earth, saying, "Above heaven and beneath earth, above heaven and beneath the earth, there is only I, eldest and first, alone and sacred." A soft rain fell, wrapping him in quiet. Shadows and wings angled among the branches, taking him up in their great awkward claws. Dragons bathed him in forest waters. Then the party headed back for home. At the palace, a rishi, a poet and seer, was waiting. She had learned of the birth by signs and dreams. She had traveled day and night to see the child. She bent over him for a long time. And when she stood up, tears ran down her cheeks. "I'm crying," said the rishi. "I'm old. I won't live to hear him teach." The queen did not recover from childbirth. She sank and sank into another world, and after a week she died. After the funeral, the queen's sister, Mahaprajapati, in turn married the king and adopted the child as her own. The boy was named Siddhartha. His family name was Gautama. The king, still in mourning clothes, gathered the omen readers and fortune tellers. The chief fortune teller spoke first. "Auspicious signs found on this child's body, such as its golden color and the exquisite radiance that shines from his face, show that he has a branching path before him. If he follows a life of power and splendor, nothing will be denied to him. He will become the emperor of the earth. That is one path. If, on the other hand, he follows the spiritual life, he will go into the forest and search for enlightenment. He will find what he is looking for on that path too, and become the founder of a great tradition that will help everyone toward freedom from the suffering that the mind inflicts." "What conditions," asked the king, "would lead this boy to take the path in which he will become the emperor of the earth with its plains and fertile valleys, its cities, towers, and armies? And what conditions might lead him to forget his ambitions and responsibilities and seek enlightenment? Great king, it's clear, his natural course will be to seek freedom of the mind. Freedom from the chains of suffering and freedom from all creatures. say freedom for all creatures. Natural course will be to seek freedom of the mind, freedom from the chains of suffering, and freedom for all creatures. 4 things, 4 sights, 4 touches, 4 meetings will turn him away from ruling. It will be hard to prevent these occurrences, and if he sees these 4 sights, there will be no turning back. And what might these 4 events, 4 sights, 4 touches, 4 blows consist of? Wondered the king. That too is clear. The first sight is to see someone old and decrepit, long in the tooth, feeble and short of breath. That is the first touch. I see, said the king. And the second? The next sight is someone sick, fevered, coughing up blood, and in a bad way. That would have a powerful effect. Go on. The king's voice was hoarse. The wise men began to speak more quickly. Your Majesty, the third sight, yes, that's a corpse, we're certain of it, to be sure, and a body laid out and ready for burning. The fourth touch, and no doubt your Majesty has guessed this, well, that is the sight of a person who seeks the way, someone who has forsaken ambition in the world and is indifferent to the favor of others, or the things that everyone desires, indifferent even to their own thoughts and passions. A glimpse of that kind of person, and the prince would surely leave the kingdom. The next day, the palace was closed off and the child sequestered, shut off from the 4 forbidden sights. Siddhartha's childhood was as cushioned and unremarkable as his minders could make it. Years later, though, he remembered an incident that was significant. In the memory, his father, the king, is breaking a furrow in the fields during the annual ploughing ceremony. The oxen have a comforting animal smell, and flower gardens are strung on their horns. Siddhartha is a child, not quite school age. He lies under a rose apple tree, alone for a moment, unattended. His father is absorbed in his task, and his minders are watching the ceremony. The child is held in no one's gaze. A light breeze touches his face. There's dappled shade and the scent of grass. His eyes move slowly over the paddock. Nothing is on his mind. There is no fear, no tension, no desire. A parakeet flies into the green branches and the sky opens before it and closes behind it, fitting exactly. His breath opens and closes too. Time stops. The sun stands still in the sky. He is sheltered in the leafy twilight. There is nothing to add, no resistance to strip away. Everything is complete and sufficient. A question appears in his mind the way a bird appears in the sky. The question is, am I afraid of this happiness? It makes no sense to the child. As well as a question, it's the beginning of a fear, a doubt held up against completeness, and the demands that such completeness might make. This fear also tells him who he is, pulls him down into who he is, a child in a field. Then the spell breaks, the sun begins to move again, and the palace attendants remember the boy under the tree, swooping down to feed him rice milk. He returns to luxury, forgetfulness, impatience, beautiful things, and beautiful manners. He returns to existing at a distance from his life. Other things happened. He had a cousin who liked to hunt, and one afternoon winged a swan with an arrow. Siddhartha got to the bird first, and she was still alive. He saw the fear in her eyes, felt her shaking, ran up his arm into his own body. She was like him, he thought. She wanted to live and go back to her swan life with her mate and cygnets. He was touched by her. Everything alive, he thought, has its own truth. He broke the arrow, pulled the shaft through, stroked the swan's soft neck, and wrapped her to his chest. This enraged his cousin, but Siddhartha didn't care. After that, the cousin hated him. Whenever the prince went to town, men on horseback hurried ahead to clear the streets. The poor were driven down side alleys, the sick and old were thrust through the nearest doorway. Funerals were interrupted, and wandering pilgrims were ordered to conceal themselves. By the time the prince came through, no blemish marred what he saw. He began to notice that he didn't fit in. He was a lonely child. He chose for his best friend his chariot driver, someone he met every day, a boy named Chana. When you saw one of them, the other one was somewhere near. Chana knew the hidden pathways, the existence of which had never occurred to Siddhartha, and they sneaked out of the palace unsupervised. The gods conspired with them, making the guards drowsy and distracted. The first time the young men went into the city together, someone appeared in front of them, a woman ancient and bent over from work in the fields. Her hair was thin and white and floated in cloud-like wisps. Her skin was like dark, cracked clay, and her cheeks were sunken. He couldn't help staring, and she felt his gaze and turned her head up like a bird to look at him. Her black eyes held his. She was like nothing he had ever seen, and her eyes were open to him. He felt for a moment that he had stepped outside of the dream he was always inside. He turned to touch his friend, but when he turned back, the woman had disappeared. 4 times the two friends went into the town, and each time they met someone strange. On the second journey, Siddhartha stepped into a shop, thinking it was a place to get something to drink. And as his eyes adjusted, he saw a figure on the bed by the wall. The man was thin and sweating. The bones on his face stood out. He was shaking and talking to himself. He coughed and blood came out of his mouth. Again, the man's eyes caught his. The eyes didn't ask for anything, and their steadiness was disturbing. Siddhartha's friend called out, and the prince stumbled outside. When he turned back to the shop, he couldn't find the man. What was that? What's happening to him? Asked Siddhartha. Chana shrugged, and the prince realized that if his friend had seen the man, he would have found nothing remarkable about this sight. The meeting was for Siddhartha alone. The prince wondered with the dizziness of someone on a precipice why he had asked. On the third journey, a day blue and unshadowed, they were returning at dusk, when 4 men ran by carrying a litter. They held torches in their hands, and as they drew level with the boys, they stopped. The litter held a bundle in white linen. As in a dream, one of the men carefully wound back the cloth and uncovered the face for the boys to see. It was a young woman. There was nothing disfigured about her face. It was just that no breath moved through her. Her green eyes were open. Under the gaze of the bearers, the prince's hand rose slowly to touch her cheek. Her silence and the shocking chill of her skin was something he remembered all his life. Chana was concerned. You knew about this, though, right? It was not that Siddhartha didn't know about death. He knew his mother had died, but these facts had no weight with him before. He felt as if he was struggling up from sleep. On their 4th trip outside the palace, the boys ran into a woman in robes, a pilgrim. "Who are you?" Siddhartha asked. "What are you doing?" She laughed, amused by them, amused by everything, actually. When they persisted, she said she was a traveler, like clouds, like the river. Siddhartha felt hurt. He had hoped she would explain things. She might end his confusion right then. "Well, someone has to put an end to suffering," she said. and laughed again as if they were sharing a joke. Someone has to put an end to suffering. But he took from that meeting the idea that a journey was required. It is said that the gods intervened and themselves took the form of the forbidden sights, immortals becoming illustrations of mortality. It is also said that the spirit of the prince's birth mother, Mahamaya, was watching from above, touching events, moving the conditions, entering the pilgrim's body. That was the prince's last encounter with gods in disguise. The sights disturbed his dreams. He became absent-minded during his mathematics classes. He began to wonder what was behind the obvious things he saw. Eventually, he married a girl called Yasudhara. The wedding was in midsummer, and flowers and more flowers were thrown over them. There were cousins who had been born on the same day, and the astrologers told Yasudhara that she had great things in store too. The cousins saw each other every day. Yasudhara wore men's clothes to go riding with Siddhartha, and at night she played music. Yasudhara was a person who saw into people. Siddhartha wanted things without knowing what they were, and waking up from a dream that had been sealed around him at birth, and was waking up from a dream that had been sealed around him at birth. And Yasudhara, too, was finding it hard to breathe in the closed-in air. She, too, was losing her belief in the dream. Inside their happiness was restlessness. This was a consequence of marrying someone who would take her out of the provincial enclosure of her life. She knew that he wanted to leave everything because he did too. While Yasudhara was pregnant, they were happy, but she, who wondered what was in people's minds and who had the capacity to imagine what was to come, was troubled by dreams of parting. She went into labor and gave birth to a son. Siddhartha was amazed at how hard birth was, at the difficulties women go through, such a necessary human thing, yet it was so hard. Afterwards, they were soft and close and exhilarated. They called the child Rahula, which means fetter because he bound them to desire, loss, and most of all to incompleteness. It was a good day, but that night everything changed. The cause was an insignificant event. As usual, dancers and musicians were in the palace. Siddhartha happened to walk past their quarters. The women were tired, their clothes had slipped off, and they lay in the sheen of dancing, sweat, and sex, deep in the innocence of sleep. Siddhartha's father had designed a palace to be the fulfillment of every desire, a temple of distraction, and that evening Siddhartha felt that the fulfillment of every desire was itself unbearably sad. He did not know what he longed for, and he knew that his longing never completed itself. He knew that his longing never completed itself. Ah, he thought, my mind is crowded with thoughts. My life has no space or quiet because it was designed to be that way. It was shaped to distract me. Till that moment, he had only accepted what was given. He had never spent even a single night outside the palace. In a swirl of grief and hope, he became convinced that a true life would be possible only if he left home. He was disgusted with himself. He couldn't help but want to flee, to breathe. Later, he wondered if his father's thoroughly suffocating scheme was directing him to this discovery. He looked in on his wife and newborn son. He saw them in the lamplight with a great intensity, as if nothing else were in the world. The baby, exhausted from his journey into shape and form, opened his large eyes and looked at him, taking him in. The smell of milk and warmth was in the air. The birth of the child was the fifth touch, the final one. He could not bear the boy to grow up in his sequestered world. In addition, a great force beyond anything he could imagine or control was at work. With deep sorrow, he turned away. It was many years before they were to meet again. When they did, Siddhartha's wife told their son to ask for his inheritance. Both Yasodhara and Rahula joined him and found for themselves what Siddhartha had discovered. Between the parting and the next meeting, Yasodhara lived in the palace and raised her child. Her life is described by the questions we ask about her. Channa, the chariot driver, brought up the prince's great white horse, Kantaka, as well as his own black mare. He wrapped their hooves with grass, muffling the sound. They mounted their horses like anyone setting off on a journey in the middle of the night. But the bridles did not ring, nor the horses whinny. The earth spirits held up their hands. The horses stepped in silence from palm to palm, carrying the men secretly out of the palace and into the dark of the night. They rode until the first birds called, the morning star grew pale, and the grey dawn came on. They had arrived at a place where hermits lived. Deer slept unafraid beneath the trees, and birds fluttered at the traveller's feet. The prince took this for a sign. He dismounted and stretched, pausing for a moment before his new life began. He looked around at everything. Then he stripped off his rings and his gold bracelets and handed them to his most loved companion. He drew his sword and cut off his own long hair. He threw the locks into the air and they didn't fall down. His sword he gave to his friend. Channa wept and said, "How will I go back to the palace without you?" "Death will part us all in the end, my oldest friend," said Siddhartha. "What am I to my mother now? The year turns and we have always known this day would come." By chance encounter, a hunter came by and the prince traded his silk robes for the man's red homespun linen. Channa turned for home, tears falling on the mare's nest. The white horse followed, and he too wept great tears. That's the first part, half of the story, perhaps. And so there you go. And yeah.
Thank you, John. It's like a great dream washing over us. A couple things to say, and then I want to hear from some other people. I could feel so many of those images just so rich and laced with Dharma that for some reason this time the dragons with their great awkward claws, washing the baby Buddha just sort of stuck with me. But you've spoken many times about how this need not be literal, and it also need not be linear for us to enter, that just an image will seize us, and that anytime that happens, the whole story comes into being then, that we're the mother with the elephant entering the womb, or we're the horse crying its big horse tears, or we're the muffled leaves covering the hooves, or things like that, and that we just keep working the various points, but that at the same time there are these archetypal moments of sacrifice, or of periods of asceticism, or those kinds of things. That you want to say anything just about balancing, taking the real journey with how it can just appear again and again and again and again through these different images.
Yeah. Well, I was just looking. The dragons appear a lot, which is sort of interesting. And in fact, behind you, there's a Japanese calligraphy of a dragon, which is a lineage matter, is given to someone when they take on teaching the Dharma in our tradition. So this one is Tess's, so speaking about her rather than to her here. But and so those images keep coming. And one of the first images in the book is maybe it's one of the Daitokuji dragons. The temples in Japan have whole ceilings with the dragons looking down and so on. It's sort of something to do with, and the dragon keeps recurring in the Buddha story, and protects the Buddha. And also, the dragon is half snake, half dragon, and is the only person who remembers previous universes because he doesn't wink out of existence when the universe does. He or she, she, and his kids, their kids, they're just there through, they're living in a waterhole in India, even when India winks out of existence, things like that. So I love the way I suppose there's that, and the way pilgrimages are important, like setting off is one of the great, things the child sets off from home, sets off to discover the world. Luke Skywalker, find out who you're, in this case, who your mother is, but which is interesting. I don't know how much that changes things, but so yeah, so there's that. Now that I wanted to read, I don't know if it's a smart idea or not. I noticed my daughter is on here from Edinburgh, but and there's this little story about her because she was my kid, that she had to suffer me working up the Dharma through her consciousness. And when I first heard about the Buddha's life, the extremity of the departures and losses struck me. As if their repetition, Siddhartha lost his mother when he was a baby and in turn abandoned his own child, his wife, his realm. I was always disturbed by this sacrifice. And so anyway, I fell into Zen basically because I sort of would notice things like, oh, the stars, and I'd fall into the eternal moments that are granted to everybody. I'd be on a fishing boat and I'd see the phosphorescence in the sea, and so I just fell into some Tibetans came to town actually. And I thought, oh, without knowing anything about what they're doing, that sounds about right. So I was, in a way, my fate guided me, my daimon guided me. But the night my daughter was born, she rested on my chest, and the tenderness of her skin seemed to be a mystery beyond the stars. She and I were both included in that pattern, along with her mother, the doctors and nurses, the scent of plum blossoms through the open window. As she grew, I took her with me when I traveled to teach retreats. The idea was we would have to have silence, peace, and awakening in the middle of the disorder of life. The modern monastery could include children. It had to be possible, I thought. Other children came to retreats too. They would take cut lunches and hurtle off up the creeks, coming back in time for supper. My story did relate to the Buddhas. The correspondence was what in poetry is called a half rhyme. There's a true connection, but it's not identical. It's not love and dove, it's love and stove. On my way to teach such a retreat, I carried my infant daughter onto an airliner, and she wailed all the way across the Pacific in the bulkhead bassinet. It's as if when I left the palace, even though the spirits tried to help me steal away, she made all the noise in the world. So that's how we left the palace together. A steward saying, "It's hard to have a nipper," secretly passed me a bottle of champagne from first class. He was like the milkmaid in the Buddha's story, offering blessings and nourishment. So, and I found that many places in the Buddha's story opened to me, and the journey itself was a resting place. It came alive when the light seemed not to play line by line on the narrative and its destination, but to strike the shards, the particular moments. So that seems a lot about what we're doing in a way, the shards, the whole myth about the Gnostic myth about we sort of, I don't know, finding a hole in this broken bits of the universe, finding the shards. And Zen does that, I think. Enlightenment is in this moment.
I wonder, Allison Atwill, you have anything you'd like to say or ask as we chat?
Yeah, that is a beautiful place to start, the image of the shards and taking up the Buddha's story not as a linear path of ascendance out of our human lives, but as an elliptical journey that never ends. And the way John wrote the book, where whichever moment you find yourself in is not an impediment to your awakening. It actually is this moment of the whole of your awakening. And when I was looking for the images for the book, one of the things that I looked through thousands and thousands and thousands of images, and I began to get a feel for which ones held in their in the feeling tone a human face or human emotion, and not one of that had that stripped away. And we found that the Japanese images in particular held that human quality. And what else do I want to say about that? There's this one image that it was such an important moment in the story, which John just referenced in his own life, but also in the story where the Buddha leaves his young child. And if you hold that moment in the realm of morality, of this is a bad, terrible person, we're going to, chastise him for how could he have left. But actually, it's filled with sorrow for everyone in the room, and not just, and the sorrow itself, the letting the sorrow, you can feel in the image that we chose that the sorrow was washing through Siddhartha, and the sorrow itself was already the elixir of awakening. And that every human life, you will have to leave someone or something you love. You probably won't be able to get through a single day without this moment occurring. And so for the images in the story and the way John so beautifully wrote it, we wanted to include that aspect where you could, each moment held the shard and you could enter it there.
Without, just briefly, thank you. I think the images do a different thing from words, and I'm so familiar with how poetry works and things. So really nice. And we decided at some stage, because of Alison's vast research, we would use the East Asian images, not the Indian images, because the Indian images always emphasize somehow the purity and the emaciation and things like that, and also in a way, the subservience of the feminine. And so we decided to use the Chinese and the Japanese images. We could find them. There are a lot in the cave paintings, the great ancient cave paintings and things like that we knocked off. But one of the ones, there was one we chose for the home, what's called the home leaving in the Indian tradition. We thought we really want to use this, and it's really nice, but it's an Indian image, and so we looked up who did it, and there was some Japanese artists who went to restore a temple in India. It was very touching, and it's got a bit of Indianness about it too, but it's full of sort of the poignancy of the moment. As Buddha's all dressed in Indian clothes and everything, but he's looking in and can't quite bring himself to leave, and the baby's at the breast actually looking at him. Yeah. So So the voyage through the images was also good. Thank you. Yeah.
Anything more you want to say, Allison?
Well, I think the image that comes to mind is the one you brought in earlier, where all of the clothes, the kimonos, are hanging on the line, and how many of the images, we also got to choose which lines of the story were paired with the image, and so some of those choices were left with, as John referenced earlier, enough uncertainty that the imagination, the reader's imagination, was immediately pouring through the images, almost like receiving a dream, that you couldn't quite tell what things meant. And so that was, just a lot of fun to do as well.
Michelle Riddle, you want to ask or say anything?
I think this is a beautiful book. And as John mentioned, in a way, it was a long time coming, and he's told the story so many times, and it's evolved. And that's kind of that redreaming that, Tess, you mentioned. And I have this image of it. It got to the point where it's like John consumed the story and made it so much him that the way that the Dharma of John comes out in this story is so beautiful, because it's so the wisdom of a lived life told through the Buddha's life makes that that division between the Buddha and each of us. You can see how diaphanous it is, and whatever touches any one of us from this story and this beautiful telling and the images, then it becomes ours, And this is such for me, John made this his, and in that process gives us how to make it ours in this book. So I'm just very touched by it, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to enjoy it.
John Joseph, you want to ask or say anything?
I want to congratulate you on the book as well. It's just a beautiful book, just from beginning to end, and just the pictures, the writing. I love the more like love and stowe, which is exactly right, it seems. We mentioned a little bit dreams, and I just noticed dream being mentioned throughout the story often, and starting with Mahamaya, right? I guess her name is Great Dream. And I was listening to your audio version last night, and I just kind of put my feet up on the desk, and and I got about halfway through it. I fell asleep, and I actually began to dream within your very dreamlike reading. So I don't know. Maybe it's too big a question, but what are dreams? What is dream? What is redreaming throughout this story? What is it? What is it doing?
What I think of is that one of the last pieces of calligraphy done by a very notable KOAN teacher, Yamamoto Gyampo Roshi, was dream. I think, and we've all seen that somewhere. And the idea that it might be a way to take life more lightly and generously. And I think the thing for me it means is we're nourished by things we weren't expecting. We're nourished by the deeper level of life. So that why poetry is hard, some people, not for everybody, but poetry can be hard to write, for example, is because you don't know where you're going, you don't even know what you're doing, and something comes through you from this deep level, and sometimes it's wonderful, and sometimes you're not really so happy with it. So it's like that. And then the editing process might go on. And so I feel like that's why we do koans together, because I feel like koans clearly come out of that dream place, out of the depths, not about things we think about or plan or had a 7-step process for. And so I think the story, I try to tell the story as that sort of process itself, something I didn't know what I was going to be saying next, that kind of thing. Thanks, John. Nice to bring dreams in. Glad you fell asleep. That's an important thing in the story. Like, where did you fall asleep in the story? That might belong to you.
It was about where you ended, actually, and I was dreaming. All my brothers and sisters were standing around me, smiling, and it was really touching. And then I just woke up, after a few minutes, and realized the story continued on. But
well, you're coming home, Yeah.
Mm.
Well, thanks, John.
Yeah. Can I just ask one more thing real quick, or touch on something that there was a line that really struck me, and you mentioned it, you said you can't take yourself with you, so you go on this journey, and it was a little bit kind of what Allison was touching on, maybe, where if you look at it from a as a morality play, it's not going to work. And you mentioned, though you didn't repeat the story about when you were down in Australia and you first was introduced to Tibetan practice. But I just love this quality of where you can't take it with you, where you have to leave all your treasures behind, and even your I don't know, your most dear, I don't know, interpretations of yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so the deep difference in our life, we look back and think, why did I do that? But that's where the Greeks would say that's where the daimon led me, And when I first heard about the Dharma, it was Tibetans. I knew nothing about it. I just knew something would be a good idea for me to study, And I heard about the Tibetans some Tibetans coming and having a 1-month-long retreat, and from a woman I was working at the same publishing house as her, and she was a senior editor, and I just said, how can I get hold of them? And I knew nothing about meditation, Tibetans, Buddhism, So I think that's the dream quality is coming up, that the dream has hold of us. And I think the people reify the idea of not having a self, but it's that none of that stuff is that important. We're in the layers of the universe. I think like that, yeah.
Well, and also you're bringing me to in the second half of the book, you have a great line in this first half, close to the end, which was something along the lines of, "It's an unstoppable force that you can neither imagine nor control." Like that the whole story is unfolding, or the in a way, I guess that's part of the dragon, but that this thing that's leading to his awakening, this inner force, and that everything's conspiring with, is not even something he could have even begun to conceive of. And yet everything sort of, even his father, who seems to be constraining him. You had a great line too about even that might have been the thing that made all this, that pointed him in this direction. And then we have the milkmaid, who enters in the second half, and whose dream is the thing that, she listens to, and then brings him the milk that survives him, because he's right at that edge where effort can no longer do the thing. Receiving the blessings and support of the world is going to have to be the gate, and renouncing the purity and that you were speaking of. And then we also have the dragon snake down under the water, who's between universes and comes to, so there's all these things that I wonder if you'd speak a little bit about that pivot that happens, that everything's going in one direction and then suddenly he's done as much as he can possibly do. And there's then something shifts and everything starts coming toward him in a different way. You have something you want to say about that?
Well, despair might be necessary sometimes. It's like I don't know. It's sort of like, what I succeed out of the things I set off that I knew I wanted, but then by the time I'm there, I'm different. It's a different thing. If you set off looking for enlightenment, the person who gets enlightenment will not be the one who set off, and the person who won't be, I don't know. They won't care what people think of them so much, and they won't all that stuff. And it's sort of, and I don't know that I'm. Part of the most enlightenment stories is you notice that, I'm not different from the tree or the fox outside that I put dates out for, or things like that. And the first koan in many traditions is, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And, well, I'm the dog. So it's like that. So I think it's that. I had a thought. I don't want to impose, but it seems a wasted opportunity not to ask Marie Howe if she wants to say anything, and you can say no. And well,
thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And John, thank you for this book. I've loved listening to everyone. I just came from visiting my grown-up siblings in Rochester, New York, and one of their children. There were a lot of new babies around, and I was thinking about that gaze of the newborn at the breast, gazing at his father. And we spent hours just staring at the face of a 7-week-old baby, waiting for his eyes to open. I mean, just like, wait a minute, I'm going to watch now for a while. And then all we wanted was to see those eyes open and gaze into this little face. What was that? What was it? Such a joy to look into that little face, who seemed to look back, but perhaps couldn't even see us. It's like the sleepy face of a god. I don't know, although there are no gods, but there it was. But I was thinking so much about poetry, John, and about how the poem is the enemy of writing a poem, and the impediment is the way, the transformation. That always, so many things you said about how we have a secret feeling for our demons, how the most repugnant and smelly one is possibly the portal, that the way to go is the way we would not want to go, and not knowing what's going to happen to us when we do. I feel so integral to the writing of a poem, as Louise says in her essay, that you cannot know where you're going. And when you don't know where you're going, we are giving everything up all the time, especially our idea of ourselves. My idea of myself is a prison lately. I've been thinking about, it's just a prison. This idea I have of myself, and I wish I could drop it like a dress to the floor and just leave it there and move on without it. So the impediments, I kept thinking about, what are the impediments? And so many, but one of them, my refusal to believe that I do have a secret relationship with my demons. I'm really willing to take that on, and also to give up the idea of myself, and to not know where I'm going at minute to minute. But this story, I love how you infused it with your humanity and your fatherhood. And, I would love to hear from your daughter. I don't mean to impose on your daughter either, if she's here, but.
She went off. Perhaps she thought I might call on her.
Yeah, she might have fled. I understand.
She grew up in the Zendo. She's used to jumping overboard.
But it's great to be with you all of you, everybody who's speaking, who's not speaking. Your presence is profound.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
Anybody else you wanna ask, John, or you wanna chat to?
So many really interesting people on here. Anything you choose somebody. The thing about Tess is she makes the right decision. She's like that lady in A Child's Christmas in Wales who says the right thing always.
No pressure. How about George Foy?
Good.
Hi. Well, first of all, I love just hearing John tell that story and sitting by the fire, and I love being there with all of you and hearing what you all had to say, and thank you for that. But I keep coming back to that really strong image that John referred to at the beginning of having a newborn and what to do if you want to go on a journey, and it brings back immediately a room in New York and my 7-year-old daughter raging at me. I was going on a trip that was a bit difficult. I was trying to find some modern day pirates, and I remember my daughter saying, "There are no pirates in Hong Kong." I told her where I was going. I said, "There's no pirates in Hong Kong. There's no pirates in Singapore, and there's no pirates in Tawi Tawi," which was an island in the Sulu Sea. That was my ultimate destination, and the ripping in myself that was going on at that point, where, I mean, the best thing in my life has been to be a father, and yet at the same time, and I tried to explain to her, I had to go on this trip. It was part of what I had to do at the time, but also part of who I was. And it's the same ripping that you feel going all through The Snow Leopard, that wonderful book by Peter Matheson, where he leaves his son, who has just suffered the loss of his mother, to trek through the Himalayas. And there's no resolution to it. I haven't figured that out at all. I mean, the intensity of the ripping is something I suppose I value, and yet I always wonder what that did to my daughter. And anyway, I so very much appreciate hearing about it in the context of the Buddha and John's tales and all of your comments, and just want to thank you all again. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I think that's what Michelle said. Part of the Dharma of John Tarrant is that it's in life as we have it now. I love that even in the end of this book, among the 10 koans that appear, that what is Buddha, dried shit stick, is one of them. And he has a great line about, if you think this is getting too pure, if you're tempted to be getting too pure, this is part of the other thing, and the rending and difficulties that the freedom has to appear there. And the last line I wanted to call out, and then you can say anything, last words you like, John, and it looks like we have a Jordan to sing us some vows after all. You wrote, this just really struck me, freedom is not a copy of something. It is not already known. It is less conceivable than all other conditions. I wonder if you'd say just a little more about that.
I wonder what I meant. It's not a copy of something I thought when I wrote that either. So I think the notion of meeting the inconceivable has been quite important for us as a community, and I think we have a blog called that too. But so I think it's that. I think the inconceivable's almost more interesting than something I thought I wanted. And I suppose that's it. Yeah. And it's not that whatever it is, I don't like what I like. I like Chinese food, whatever it is, But and I don't have to pretend I don't, because that's part of the inconceivable. Why do I like Chinese food so much? But so I think that the thing about it is so alarming and just to step off into the vastness the way we do every time we're free, you know, and like artists find this, and musicians know about this, poets know about this. And so every time I've been trying to work on some poems. Having Maria around makes me think, God, I better work on my poems a bit. You know? And but you know, the thing is, you're on some sort of stepping stone, and you just step, and you have to have something find your feet. You know, there's a KOAN like step by step in the dark. If my foot's not wet, I found the stone. But a simple snatch of an old haiku, I think. Yeah. But, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Doctor?
I think that's super. I think yeah. Thank you for everything you've said, and everyone else. You have any last words before we get Jordan to sing us some vows? Thank you for writing this. I mean, people have said this, but thank you for dreaming it and ushering it into its next level of being in the world. And I personally, I have a stack, so I can give them to everyone I know. You know, it just feels like the heart of our tradition, and so thanks.
Well, thank you, Tess, and it's really nice being interviewed by you. So thank you. And I guess I feel like, you know, it's like the dog, Buddha nature, and all that. I feel like we're all doing this, and there's a marvelous thing about having creating a culture for enlightenment was an idea I had a long time ago, and I thought, I wonder what that means. I have to, and so I think then you just stumble along and something appears. Oh, that must be what it is, you know. So it's like that. But I do feel like all these dear people showing up, and some of them I don't know, but mainly we know each other pretty well. And thank you. And we're making this. We're making something beautiful here. And it just keeps coming into form. We don't know what it is before it appears, you know. So thank you, Tess.